And it's only after 3 years that you turn to your dissertation. And so in theory, you should take another couple of years. But because jobs are getting so competitive now, people are trying to become much more professional before they leave graduate school. So they're trying to publish, they're trying to get their work as strong as possible. And so I think, and then people procrastinate. So a lot of people take a lot longer.
In the United States, in almost every graduate program, you are paid by the university to be a student. And the payment is usually in exchange for you're doing teaching. You're having teaching responsibilities. In some of the wealthier graduate programs, they also give fellowship money where you don't have to teach, and you make maybe $15,000 or $16,000 a year, which is enough to live acceptably, not extravagantly, as a graduate student. But the funding is usually limited to 5 years, maybe 6 years. Kit and I both went to the University of Arizona to get our doctorates in philosophy, and they cut you off after 5 years. That's why we got done in 5 years. Some places are a little more generous than that. It's all, one point that Kit made is correct. I went to graduate school first at Oxford, so I started at an American university. I got my undergraduate degree, but when I went to Oxford, there were no classes. You were not required to take any courses at all. You met with your teacher, your tutor, once a week or once every other week, and that was it. And then you had to take examinations at the end of the year, and it was up to you to study on your own. But in the United States, as Kit said, you have to take, on average, 3 years, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, of coursework, in part because the students are not as well prepared philosophically coming out of American universities, because they usually only take philosophy classes for 2 years rather than for 3 or 4 years.
So would you say this is accurate? The undergraduate philosophy training in the United Kingdom is better than America, but the graduate training in America is better than the United Kingdom?
Without question, I would say that.
Tell us about optional and mandatory courses. What is the ratio, and are there any mandatory courses at all?
It depends on the program. Each program gets to design its own requirements. In almost every program in the United States, there's a logic requirement, an advanced symbolic logic requirement that I almost failed. Kid, you might have done much better.
I did much better.
Okay. I almost
passed by that much.
Yeah, I passed by that much.
But it's like grading treatment. I mean,
well, it's
starting the master program or PhD program. These people,
it was very humiliating, that's for sure. I know that.
Human rights atrocities.
Yes. So almost every department, maybe every program, has a logic requirement, and then after that, it's very different. 30 years ago, almost every graduate philosophy program had a language requirement, a foreign language requirement. Now, most programs do not. Our program does not have a foreign language requirement. Does yours?
I just killed ours last year.
Okay, Kit. That's typical for the American insularity, American parochialism. We just need to speak English and we will do fine in this world. And that's the way it is. Most programs have some history of philosophy requirements. Ours, I think, is a typical requirement where you have to take one course in ancient philosophy and one course in modern philosophy. Some programs require a third history of philosophy course. And then there are usually broad distributions, so you have to take 1 or 2 courses in metaphysics and epistemology, or 1 or 2 courses in value theory, so aesthetics, political philosophy, and ethics. But as far as specific required courses, mandatory courses, we have none other than logic. Many programs also have what's known as a pro-seminar, which is a first-year course which either lasts 1 term or both terms in the year, where they take all first-year students, usually through classic 20th century works in metaphysics, epistemology, and the philosophy of language.
about not mandatory courses. What are they?
So say there are 6 or 7 mandatory classes, and then say total you have to take 14 classes. I think our program was 16. Our program now is 16. So usually it's about half and half mandatory classes and electives. And the electives, people tend to specialize, right? So we both work in value theory, so we tend to take philosophy of law classes. You go to programs to study with certain professors, and so you'll take any class they offer and things like that, or to prepare for your dissertation. So, you know, if you're working in metaphysics, you're going to take a lot of metaphysics classes with the metaphysics professors. If you're working in epistemology.
How a course goes? So what is this? A formal structure of a course, or organizational structure of a course? What do you do within the course? What are the requirements within the course to success in it? Could you?
The seminars are the coursework is done in seminar format, so they're usually between 6 and 15 postgraduate students plus the professor, and you usually meet just once a week for 2 or 3 hours. And different professors run things differently. The way I run my seminars is I run them in the same format. I have all the students do a reading for the week, and then half of the students submit one-page papers that reconstruct the central arguments of the reading. And then we spend our time in seminar having the students present their papers, and I offer more background and criticism of that. And then as far as additional requirements, I think the standard is to ask students to write a 15 to 20 page paper at the conclusion of the term. I don't do that because I don't think that's that valuable. I ask them to write 3 or 4 6-page papers throughout the semester because I think students need to write less and write more rigorously, and that gives them more exercise in doing that.
Do they choose the topic, or you give them some topics, or?
They almost always have some kind of choice. Sometimes it's constrained, but the way I do it is I just say if we have a paper that's required, say every month, they can just write on any topic that interests them over the reading of that
Within
month.
the topic of the theory of value.
Yes.
Within your course.
Yes.
What are the criteria you use to check?
Well, let me ask Kit first before answering that question, if she's got any thoughts.
Yeah,
about
well, I just say
your former question.
I think there's tends to be a progression. So the lower the level of class, the more the professor lectures or leads discussion. The higher level class, the more it's expected the students are going to run things or contribute or maybe do everything. So the undergraduate class, lower level undergraduate classes, there tend to be more lectures. A lot of times they're upper level classes which have some undergraduates and some graduate students, and that's a mix. And then usually by the time you get to these graduate seminars, the expectation is that they're going to do the lion's share of the contribution to the class discussions. And different people, I think that most people, the higher level, again, the lower the level, the more exams there are, the less it's based upon papers. The higher level, the fewer the exams there are, the more it's based on papers. And so I think he's right that at the highest level, the graduate seminars, there will often just be one paper, no exams or anything like that.
So how do you evaluate, for example, the paper? What are the criteria? Do you have any criteria?
I have no criteria. I just decide, whatever.
Do they
your
agree with
students
me?
know that?
That's right. Well, the criteria is the criteria is probably the criteria that you use when you evaluate papers. Is the paper clear? Does it have a good thesis? Is it well argued for? It doesn't really matter whether we, in the end, agree with the thesis or not, but whether they make a compelling case, whether they can anticipate criticisms to their own view and reply to those criticisms, sort of the standard philosophical virtues.
To get credit for a course, is it important to attend seminars, lectures, or you just can give a paper, an essay, and that's all. You may not know. Is it?
You have to attend the seminar. It's only once a week. That's not so much to ask. In order to obtain credit for it, you must attend and do all the written work. Yeah.
Do you have any punishments? Or it just doesn't have credits? That's all.
Torture.
Is it? Well, don't think
Can't
you have
live without
torture.
punishment.
Spank on the bare bottoms.
Because you were talking about motivation. How do you motivate? Or how
If
do-
you're in graduate school, you're making very little money. I assume you want to be there and learn. If you don't want to learn, then you leave. Nobody's forcing
And
you to be there.
Even when they don't want to learn, they want to, it's a career, right? So, I mean, you might be in a logic class, for instance,
That's true, yes.
where you're an ethicist and you don't care that much about logic, but you do care about your standing in the program, right? So, ideally, you're going to love the material. Secondarily, you're going to want to impress the professor. The tertiary consideration is you're not going to want to perform so badly that you are in poor standing with the department, so as to lose your funding. So there's really everyone's pretty hardworking, and then if there are issues, the people are cut from the program. Because as I said, I mean, so they got 190 applications for what ends up being 5 spots. They're not going to put up with somebody who's not
Motivated.
Right.
As we know, in the United States of America, there are a lot of nations and still racial differences in the university also. Is there any inclination, national or maybe a racial inclination towards philosophy, towards abstract thinking, or not? For example, maybe from Chinese students cannot thinking the same way. Like, is there such a problem or not? Because there are from Mexico, from Chinese, Vietnam, from Europe, and it's very interesting compare that inclination.
At the graduate level, there is no such problem at all. If you know about our program or KITS program, you know who the faculty is and you know what to expect. People apply to our programs because they want to work with certain faculty members, and because of the internet now, anyone who can read English at least is able to gain access to the work of the faculty members in any given department, and they will know in advance what to expect. And so someone, very rarely someone, for instance, will apply to our program and want to do contemporary French philosophy. Nobody in our faculty does contemporary French philosophy. They're always rejected because they're just not a good fit. But maybe they have a friend who went to Wisconsin and said good things about Wisconsin, so they applied there. But really, the people who, for the most part, 95% of the people who want to come to Wisconsin, for instance, know what the faculty is doing there, and the same with any other graduate program.
So at our level, there's no difference between men, women, different ethnicity, national background, things like that. But more broadly, I think there are 2 pretty striking differences. One that you would expect, one that you wouldn't. I mentioned that the schools, the good news is that so many people go to college in the United States. The bad news is that it gets watered down, just like we talk about rights inflation. The more rights they are, the more human rights there are, the less urgent they seem to be. And the more people that go to college, it's not that everybody's going to a higher level, rather we're just lowering the level to let more people in. But at the primary and secondary level of education, there's vast differences, which track socioeconomic lines. And so the wealthy people are able to supplement the public education or send their kids to private schools or live in areas where the public schools are very good. The poorer people tend to send their children to underfunded schools where the educational experience is dramatically inferior. Because of racial racial injustice in the United States, there are a disproportionate number of wealthy white people and a disproportionate number of poor black people. So it's relatively uncommon for you to see black students in the best, most prestigious schools because the public schools from which they generally emerge are horrible schools. So that's one thing. The other thing that's not surprising, the one thing which has been very surprising to me is that there's a palpable difference between men and women. And this is system-wide. So the girls tend to do better at lower levels. They get better grades, they get better board scores. And when it comes time to apply to colleges, they're much better candidates. And so virtually all the most competitive, most prestigious schools have different standards for boys and for girls. Because if they use the same standards, the schools would be something like 75% female, 25% male. And then at my school, Washington University, I believe that the women have a 0.4 higher grade point average than the men. And they're just across the board stronger students. Now, in terms of philosophy, men tend to gravitate toward philosophy more than women for reasons I won't comment on, I won't speculate on. But there's a noticeable difference, I think, at all levels of education between the performance of boys and performance of girls. I'm not going to touch that for you too.
Nope. Go ahead. You have a question?
In Russia, in St. Petersburg State University, we have education which is for about 5 years. It's specialized, and also and it's spread on philosophical specialization. But now, for about 5 years ago, it began to introduce a Bolognian system of education where we have a bachelor's and magister. But our philosophical faculty don't want to make the Bolognian system of education for philosophers. And how do you think? What kind of education is maybe much more effective, or can it be possible to change all system of education in Russia according to Bolognian system? Or maybe specialists, 5 years, it's enough. And then we have postgraduate students. Or we must study much more longer, 4, 2, and then postgraduate.
I guess I'm still not sure what this Bolognian system is. So it's you study as an undergraduate for 3 years, and then you receive for 4, and then if you want, you study for 2 additional years to get a master's degree, and then after that you can go on and do your postgraduate work as well.
But if you study only 4 years, you don't know what to do. Why? Because if you study 5 years, you are a specialist and you can grow, maybe as a teacher. And if you finish only baccalaureate, it's something like not finishing higher education. And everybody wants to come to the master degree, and we have not enough place for everybody.
Yeah, I don't know. The one thing I would say is that it's going to depend upon the level of the incoming students, right? So the Bologna model may work well because the students are so well prepared they can do this in 4 years. And so it depends if the students entering the college have that preparation, whether they can do it in 4 or 5 years. But that's something I can't speculate on.
May I talk in Russian about Bologna process? Значит, наша география до сих пор не работает. Там два разных. Это первая система трансфера кредитов, которые получают разных университетов. А у нас просто не практикуется. А вторая это совместное признание диплома. Европейская система рассчитана на то, чтобы если вы, допустим, закончили в Испании, то пошли могли бы спокойно, допустим, работать в Германии. Белорусское сообщество, знаете, там 4 свободы. Свобода передвижения рабочего капитала. У нас все тоже стараются жить, потому что не понимают, что это такое, и правильно не двигают. Мы хотели даже пилотную университет, наш университет, Европейский государственный университет. Хотели начать пилотную программу обмена кредитов. Хотели начать пилотную программу обмена кредитов. То есть их студент каждый семестр берет 2 кредита у нас. Вот. И потом ты считаешь...
Что значит 2 кредита? Что это?
2 урока, 2 предмета.
Который не кредит.
Да, 2 предмета. И наши берут у них. Так вот наша система готова, полностью готова. А они никак свою систему не смогли преадаптировать. Как там, знаете, какие уроки возьмут у нас, как это, те баллы, которые мы дадим, как они влияют в свою систему. Вроде бы у них есть баллонский процесс, но вот элементарно, потому что они никогда не практиковали. Взяли там почту там написали, там, что но на самом деле практически. Они его никогда не делали.
I would like to continue with it, if it's possible, with the technology of education. To get credit again, to get credit for the course, for example, on the lower level, for example, the philosophy of law. Am I right that the credit for the whole course consists of different parts, because of attending lectures, preparing for seminars, writing an essay? Is that correct understanding?
So I would say philosophy of law is typically sort of a mid-level undergraduate class. And typically there are going to be exams and papers probably in a class like that. And you know, people are going to vary about whether attendance is required or not. But certainly your performance on the exams and perhaps the papers as well is going to depend upon how much you attend. So it's going to be factored in. But your grade is
It's
essentially
indirectly,
right,
all right.
even if it's not directly required.
Wait, attendance is affected with that indirectly.
Right.
Oh, all right.
And some people may require attendance, but that's other time. I don't know if you require attendance at your
How many literature usually in philosophy of law the people who are supposed to read, and how many synopses or something they must produce? Are there such? Could you give us?
It differs from professor to
it
professor.
varies dramatically.
There's no standard.
How many personal consultations do you usually have within the course? Because in Russia usually we have a course of lectures, seminars, and maybe 40 minutes of consultation before exam. Actually, what are the consultation hours?
I would say at the lower levels, there's typically very little. You often have office hours, you make yourself available to students, and the students will often come very, very seldom and only in anticipation of exams and papers. At the upper levels, where the projects are more substantial and the students are more motivated, you're likely to have more contact. But a lot of that is not required, it's driven by the student interest.
About another kind of graduation, not in the university, but when you give a dissertation, could you clarify some criteria to get a degree? So how do you get degree, and what are the criteria to evaluate that your work is fulfilled? What are the requirements so you can get degree? Requirements for what your paper. Is that the correct question?
Yeah. You have to pass a certain number of courses,
Right.
and then you have to pass some kind of examination. Different programs have different examinations.
Depending on
they're-
what the dissertation is about.
No, not depending on that. Sometimes the examinations are comprehensive examinations that every graduate student has to pass this examination, but different programs have different ones. Some of them, like at Arizona, ask you to develop a reading list in 2 areas of your choosing, and then you have a series of examinations by the faculty. in those two areas. Others require you to have passed comprehensive examinations in which they are free to ask you questions about any area in the history of philosophy, for instance. Other programs, like my program, require you just to write a paper by your third year that the faculty judges to be of sufficient quality that they think you can do good dissertation work. And then that's the second element. And then the third element is passing, writing a dissertation, and then passing an examination on the dissertation.
And how do you pass exam on a dissertation? What's the procedure?
So
What are
typically you'll
criteria?
write up something like a 200-page document. It might be a little more, it might be a lot more. I mean, a little less, it might be a lot more. And then you'll have something like 5 readers. And if they judge the written copy to be satisfactory, they'll ask you presumably to make some revisions, and then you go to an oral defense. And then typically you'll have something like a 2-hour meeting with them, and they'll ask you questions. And depending upon your ability to answer questions in that oral defense, then you pass completely. But so there's 2 sort of bars you need to get over. One is you need to produce a written document that they think is satisfactory. And then if you do that, then they schedule a defense where they question you. And if you can answer those sufficiently well, then you get your degree.
So it's a kind of an examination, but
Yeah.
without your... Are you supposed to give a speech on your paper?
No, typically they'll ask you to start off with a quick summary. So you might start off with a 10-minute summary of what you did, what the main themes were. But it's really their opportunity to ask you questions to push further about things they think are suspect. And sometimes you'll have to make revisions after your oral defense. But my impression is by the time people are ready to schedule an oral defense, very few people fail. So the question is, can you write the document that they think is defensible?
Do you check, is it his position, or is he the author, of the document, or it was said by, or written by somebody?
Right. So to make sure that the authorship is genuine, if the dissertation advisor is doing her job, she will have worked through these things, and she will have gone through many drafts and know that it's the author's work. The other thing is, if it's not your work, that should become clear in the oral defense when you're asked questions. If there's a dramatic difference between the written work and your capacity to orally defend it, that would be suspicious.
Just 1 second, Sergey. Are there questions that other people might have?
Yeah, I have a question. And I want your sincere opinion about that. Well,
Do you think I've been lying so far?
No.
No, just
I'm not
flip it.
saying Sorry. So, in 2007, I was in the University of Kansas where actually Sergey has been there. We took part in the same program, the GMPP, the Junior Faculty Development Program, and the aim of the program is to get, familiar with American system of education. So what I saw there, no fail, okay, at the end of semester. All students are successful, students, all of them. But in the American classroom, every student has his own notebook, laptop, okay. Nobody speaks, it's very good. It's very silent in the classroom. You can hear the voice of the lecturer. And some of them, really deal with class, with the subject. They write something, read something, but some of them just chuck it, okay? So I had 2 guys, and all they do, one of them chatted on Maxim, this messenger, on the messenger, and the second read all time the news about basketball, okay? I wonder, will they fail at the end of semester or not? So they didn't, actually. They also passed the class. So my opinion is that, consider that American system education on pay basis. You have to pay. There is no actual, it was a state university. The University of Kansas is not a private university. I don't know, is it funded by state, but state university. They have this function problem. And I think that the faculty administration in general in the United States, they think that the student pays his money. It's his own care, to learn the subject or not to learn the subject. But the student actually who does not deserve to pass the class, to get a success score at the end of the class, they have to be dropped out from the school, but they don't. Because of this monetary concerns me. Don't you think?
No.
You don't.
I've never considered
Uh-huh.
in assessing grades, I've never considered how much this student is paying for his or her education. And I don't think that my colleagues have ever done that either. So in this case, what was likely happening was that attendance was not, well, maybe attendance was a requirement, but participation in the class was not a criterion on which you were to receive your grade, but rather a set of examinations or papers. And presumably these people, though they paid no attention in class, were able to do well enough to pass on their examinations or papers. Now it's true that different professors have different degrees of rigor in determining what counts as a passing grade, what counts as a non-passing grade, but I've never heard of a case in which someone has taken into account the payment of a student to the university in the determination.
Not, may I ask you, how many students do you have for the courses? And what is the percentage of failed score at the tuition?
What's the second question?
What's the percentage of the failed score?
What percent fail?
In different semesters, I have different numbers. So I teach in introductory class, I'll teach either 80 or 160 students. And in an upper level class, I'll teach 20 to 50 students. And then at a postgraduate class, I'll teach about a dozen students. In my postgraduate classes, very few people fail.
What about undergraduate?
At the introductory level classes, very few people fail, but usually each semester between 2 and 5 people.
2 and 5.
That's all. Yeah. At the upper level, again, it's maybe only 1 or 2 a semester, and sometimes none, because at the upper level, these classes are electives. Nobody is required to take them. And so usually they're taking them because they are really interested in them, and so they're motivated already. But at the introductory level, many students aren't that motivated. They're just taking the course because it's a required class.
Yeah, the other thing is, I mean, there are schools that depend on tuition where there may be a sense that we're worried about students failing out and they have concerns about retention. But at a place like KU or any type of good school, students are lining up to get in. So there's no worry about failing out students out because there's others that will take their place and they'll get the tuition dollars. If anything, at these large public schools, there's not enough, I think, advising to make sure that the kids who come in get advising so that they don't fail out, right? Because you can see how the faculty don't have any financial incentive, and the administrators may be indifferent because if 10% fails out, well then it just makes room for other people.
Do you have a different, a hierarchy of degrees, scientific degrees?
Now, at the baccalaureate level, there is a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Arts. But they are not ranked higher or lower than one another.
Can you graduate with honors?
You can. You have to write an honors thesis as an undergraduate at the baccalaureate level in order to graduate with honors.
Yeah, so at the undergraduate level, it's pretty common for people to be able to graduate with honors or high honors or highest honors. And one issue that we have in the United States is with grade inflation. And so at some of the most prestigious schools, you've got like 75% graduating with honors. So it's not as honorific as you might think.
When you write dissertation, is it supposed to be new, to produce something new?
Yeah.
It's the difference between
No, it's not.
humanities and trade school.
And about philosophical education, do students learn foreign languages, for example, German and French, to read some works about, for example, Kant in a real, And what about ancient languages? Latin and ancient Greek are some closest in this language.
They are not generally required. If you work, of course, if you do your dissertation on Aristotle or Plato, you'll need to know Greek and Latin and German. Or if you do your dissertation in Kant, you'll need to know German. But otherwise, for the most part, well, I'd say many graduate programs have gotten rid of their foreign language requirements by now. Maybe most of them have.
Yeah, I would say undergraduate programs tend to have language requirements, no matter what your major is. Graduate programs in philosophy tend not to have requirements for general students, but if you're going to work on Kant, then you're going to have a very high level of proficiency in German. If you're going to work in Greek philosophy, you're going to have a very high level of proficiency in Greek. But if you're like Russ or me, you just work in more philosophy, there are no requirements.
And about work at seminars, do you usually read texts in translation or in the original text?
It depends on the nature of the seminar. So there are seminars in which if you're working in ancient Greek philosophy, for instance, you'll read it in the original. But most programs don't have enough students to support a seminar in which everyone is equipped well enough to read the text in the original language. So there'll usually be an option to read it in translation as well.
Do you have some interactive or something methods of teaching? Do you use games maybe?
No.
I'm boring as well. No movies, no games.
Our educational systems are very similar, as we see, usually.
We talk philosophy, and I do most of the talking, except at the seminar level.
Well, here we work in groups. Is that common for your?
I think not at the better schools. I think it's uncommon.
So it's usually individual. Well, not usual. Okay.
Can you mark any prominent, maybe famous recent philosopher in the United States of America nowadays? Are there?
Famous, that is
Or-
famous within American culture?
They are influential in their mind,
There are many who are influential in their own minds, yes. But
Are you talking about
mean-
public introductions?
Are you talking about those who have an influence outside of the academy, outside of the philosophical world?
Yes, maybe. Yes, yes.
There are very, very few philosophers like that. Maybe Martha Nussbaum?
Yeah, I would say there are a few that achieve popularity among the literati, but whether they actually influence institutions is unclear. So there are people like Ronald Dworkin and Martha Nussbaum who will get read by a larger audience, but whether they're impacting government policy, no.